Today I'm going to be talking about how we can center our rotation with objects that aren't exactly symmetrical. With symmetrical objects, it's really easy. We can just take something like this cube, for example, and we can place a rotator on it, and we'll see that the rotation point is dead in the center of this cube, and so it rotates exactly how it should. However, if we were to add on to this object, we can see that it moves the rotation point, and that may not always be ideal, right? Maybe we want this rotation point to still spin around this original object or the original point on the sculpt, but now it's moved a little bit. You'll notice that we can't grab the gizmo at the base, we can only grab the axis point, so we can only change the axis it rotates, but we can't move this thing back where we had it before. So how can we do that? So let's say we wanted to add something like that, right? This changes the axis point now here instead of the original thing, so that's not what we want. So what we could do is, instead of adding it as the same sculpt, we can add that there like this, right? Now it's not grouped, so that won't work, but we can group these things, then change the affected object to affect the whole group, and now this still moves it over, right? Now if we take this sculpt and make the whole thing symmetrical, it moves the gizmo back to the center. So here we can take this symmetrical piece and turn it off, and the rotation point stays. Let's say you had something complex that was like a curve, right? Like this. And we wanted to add this into the group. So we can add that there. And we can see it changed the rotation point, right? So now we could try and make this symmetrical, but you can see it's not exactly the easiest to determine. It'd take a lot of little fidgeting and fussing and stuff. So, you know, you could do it like that, but then you see we have this kind of messy object that we're creating, and it's not exactly the easiest. So there's got to be a better way. So let's go ahead and create whatever object we want. So let's say we have this, and then we have some weird curve thingy again. Right, like that. And then say we had, I don't know, maybe like a donut over here. Right? How would we make the symmetry point here? The way we do this is, instead of applying a rotator onto this object, we apply the rotator onto a completely symmetrical object like this standalone cube. Right? So if we put the rotator instead onto this cube, we can see that the cube rotates perfectly fine. And so we can take a tag and put it on here, and we'll give it a name, and we'll put this at the center point of the cube. Now, like I said, we can't move this point on the rotator, but what you can move is the gizmo point on a teleporter. Right? So if we place the teleporter gizmo dead in the center of the cube, we can look for that tag and match the target orientation, and now this teleporter will copy the rotation from this object here. So this object doesn't even need to be visible. It just has to be on somewhere in the scene. And now we can have this thing rotate at any point we want, as long as that's where we put our teleporter gizmo. So if we want it to rotate around this instead, it will. This would also work for grouped objects. So say we had these two things in a group, right? Those are two separate sculpts. We can take this teleporter and place it onto the group, and again, instead of having to rotate between them, we can just rotate wherever we want based on the teleporter gizmo. So I do have one tip, which is to try and center your whole thing around a object. So standard cube here on the origin will help a lot. So now we can go ahead and maybe scale this thing out. So if we had this, for example, now we can just cut it in half or however we want, right? We can cut it like this. And now when we place our teleporter, we can put it on the object. And we now have a nice point on which to center the gizmo, right? We can now easily tell where the center is because this cube is here. And so we'll go ahead and follow that orientation. Now we can come into here and delete the cube from the sculpt, and it works exactly how it should. Now somebody asked me the other day how they could have a character rotate some objects within their level. I'm guessing it's like a platforming level so that players can get from one side of a gap to another. Here I've created these objects which are all one sculpt. They're not grouped or anything. And clearly they aren't symmetrical, right? There's like this little bit over here, and I guess there's one over there, but there's also an interior one. And so what I did is the exact same thing I just showed, where I created them around the center object here. So I'll go ahead and go through this scene really quickly, just so we can kind of all be on the same page here. There's a player character over here who walks over, and they can interact with this console. There's this trigger zone that detects possessed controller sensors. And when they're in that trigger zone, it turns on this remote controllable controller sensor. So when they're in the zone and they press the square button, it changes this selector to the B port, which powers this microchip. This microchip turns on a camera and also shows some text on how to rotate these things. And I've just wired in the triangle and the X button into some nodes, which are on some blank keyframes. If at any point they're in this console and they want to back out, they can press circle, which changes the selector back to port A, which turns on the original chip, which just shows a little button to interact with. Surprise, surprise, I've done the same exact thing here. I just have two chips, or two sculpts here. Each of them has a tag. One is called counterclockwise, and the other one is called clockwise. And they both have a rotator, except one rotates clockwise and the other one rotates counterclockwise, right? We'll take this teleporter and we'll stamp it on to this object. And so we'll just have this thing follow one or the other. Let's do clockwise. And so with the grid on, I'm just going to center this teleporter gizmo right in the center of this cube. Cool. And I'll do the same exact thing with this one, except this one will go with counterclockwise. And again, same thing. I'm just going to center this right into the center of the cube. So since the inner platform is following the clockwise, when we press X, we should turn on the clockwise object's rotator. So here's the X keyframe, and we'll just turn this on. Here's the triangle keyframe, which should turn the other one on. And by default, they're both off. So the only thing left to do here is to just come into these sculpts and delete the center cubes, just to get rid of that. And with all that done, we can now take a look at how this works. So as we come up to the console, we see that there's a little button prompt, and when we press it, it removes control from the character. Forgot to mention that before. That's also just a keyframe. And when we hold X, we can see the inner platform rotates, and when we hold triangle, we can see the outer platform rotates. Right, so this way we're able to rotate the platforms so that our character can navigate the rather easy platform here. But the point wasn't how to make a good puzzle here, but how to rotate the things so that the rotation point is around the center. And I think that I've done a decent job of showing that. So, if you enjoyed this, if you found this useful, please let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If you're new around here, click subscribe. I got a lot of cool tutorials coming out, and I post them regularly and pretty frequently. So if you enjoy this kind of content, stick around. I'd love to have you. I hope everyone's doing well, staying safe. I'll see you next time. One last thing, I'll go ahead and release this little scene as a public thing so that if you were curious on how any of this worked, you could always come back in here and take a look yourself. I'll leave a link for that in the description box below. Anyways, little side note over.